Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of Bluegrass. You've enjoyed live Bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite Bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. I'm very happy to welcome Cathy Fink to Got Grass today. Welcome.
Hey, it's nice to be here. Thanks, Chris.
I usually start with a non-music question, which is, what would a perfect day off be for you?
A perfect day off. I'm hoping that for Marcy Marxer's birthday, I'll have a perfect day off tomorrow and go down to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
Really?
A perfect day off. Sometimes it's reading a book. Sometimes it's going for a hike. It depends on the day. To be perfectly honest, sometimes it's just playing music for my own fun and learning something new.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. A lot of people I've talked to on the podcast say, I never go a day without my instrument. I just can't do it. Where others say hiking, fishing, it's a wide range of answers people have.
Well, it is an odd thing because people have misunderstandings when it comes to the fact that what you do for work is also something that you just plain love to do. So, I'm rarely looking to take a break from playing music. I'm looking to take a break from being on the computer, doing the business of the music business, but to pick up my banjo or my guitar or my ukulele, that just brings in more joy. And I'm still trying to learn new stuff every day.
So you've had a very illustrious, long career, a lot of acknowledgments, Grammy nominations, Grammys, many, many albums. Could you go back a little bit in time to your upbringing and how you got to be so interested and fell in love with playing music?
I can't. I'm going to say that I was born that way. My mom played some piano and she was pretty good, but she wasn't emotionally attached to it the way I'm emotionally attached to music. I mean, at some point she kind of gave it up, but my first musical memories are, in fact, standing next to the piano while she was playing and belting out my favorite songs as a 3 and 4-year-old, which were things like Little Brown Jug and Beautiful Dreamer. And I always loved to sing, always. And that's not something she did much of. But as soon as there was an opportunity to start piano lessons, I did that. I quit after a short period of time to pick up the guitar and obviously never quit on that. And because my guitar lessons started as a kid right after my father died, there was not actually enough money to keep up guitar lessons. And I think my mother thought, well, she'll give that up soon. And I never did. I just, I got the book, The Guitar Styles of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and kept on going. I think it's always been in me. And throughout school, I loved music, joined every chorus, chorale, singing group I could join, auditioned for ones that were outside of school, started writing terrible songs in my teens. And the more music I got exposed to from outside of my house, the more I loved it, And so I'm gonna stick with Born That Way.
Yeah. So was music I should ask this, was there ever an option for you to do something other than music in a career, or were you always going to be in music as a career, as far as you remember?
There were absolutely options. I initially went to school with the idea that I would probably do something in teaching, possibly special education. I was also very interested in languages and linguistics. I graduated from high school fluent in French. But in the end, the pull towards music was really the thing that got me.
Right. Do you remember a point in your life when you realized, hey, I'm a professional musician? This is my career. This is what I make a living at. Or are you
Oh,
just kind of more,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was, so when I was 19 years old, I lived in Montreal. I had gone to McGill University for 1 year, and there was a new batch of grants. You know, Canada is the land of grants for the arts. And there was a grant that I applied for to take a troupe of musicians around performing all summer long into institutions all over Montreal. And I think we had a group of like 8 people. And when you think about this in 1972 or 3, when you're corralling 8 different artists or groups, because some of them were actual groups, there was a bluegrass band in the whole entourage, you're corralling them by telephone in the days of no answering machines and no other way of getting in touch with people.
I
And
remember.
somehow at the age of 19, I did that. And we made something like $70 a week for the whole summer and played a lot of very interesting places. The first prison I played, I had my wallet stolen, perfect. And at the end of the summer, I went, look at this. I saved $700. I am rich. I can live on this for a whole year. I'm going to become a musician. And if I never get a gig at the end of a year, plan B comes along. And if I get a gig, then I have more than enough money to live on till the end of the year. And then I basically went to the phone book, for anybody who remembers those. They were very thick and they have very small print. And I looked for every community organization I could find that might vaguely be interested in having me come to a concert or a workshop. And at the time, I played guitar and Appalachian dulcimer, and I sang, and I managed to get a lot of places to hire me. And what I realized on day one is that my career wouldn't be based on playing only the obvious places such as a folk club. It would be based on being versatile enough to get out there and play for almost any audience and create not only sort of a community vibe from that, but also an income stream from thinking outside the box. And it's also when I started doing music for kids and families, because I was a substitute teacher at a lot of daycare centers. And I'd take my guitar in, and the word got around. Hey, get that girl with the guitar. She'll sing with the kids, And the next thing you know, the Girl Scouts are inviting me. And the next thing you know, an elementary school is inviting me. And so in this wide world of parallel careers, I developed something that Marcy and I have continued, which is an enjoyment of using music to communicate with diverse audiences.
I just have to mention, and my podcast audience will not know or care about this, but I love the color blue in that room. I don't know what it is. It's a gorgeous blue.
Yeah, it's sort of a royal blue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's pretty. So at that point in your life, through teenage years in college and after, was there any particular musician that really influenced you in a way that kind of directed your career?
Well, as a teenager, I listened to the radio. And in those days, one station played 10 kinds of music. So I would listen to Motown, R&B, Roger Miller, country music, the Beatles, Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen, the Weavers when they were on the radio. It was all on the same station. And I'm so grateful to have grown up in an era when it was kind of just all right there for me. And then when I moved to Montreal, but I didn't know any folk musicians where I grew up in Baltimore. Even though there was a big scene and a big bluegrass scene, it wasn't where I grew up, and public transportation wasn't particularly special to get to those things. So when I moved to Montreal, it's the first time I actually lived in a city. Public transportation, word of mouth. Hey, there's a coffee house here. There's a coffee house there. There's an open mic over there. And all of a sudden, in Canada, I heard my first bluegrass band. I heard my first banjo. I became familiar with the Appalachian dulcimer. I became familiar with, through the dulcimer, the music of Gene Ritchie and Paul Clayton, Appalachian music. It's like this world popped open for me. And, that's what I ate and drank all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And then at that point, my musical influences were a lot of the musicians hanging out in Montreal at the time. There was a fabulous singer named Penny Lang, who's no longer alive. But Penny was a big part of even the Greenwich Village scene. She was from Canada, but she was really, really talented. Talented folk singer, talented blues singer. And in fact, there's been a story that she was offered the first opportunity to sing and record Leonard Cohen's song Suzanne. And it is documented that in the early days when Leonard Cohen was trying to sort of infiltrate the folk world, that she gave him some guitar lessons. I went to all of her concerts. We became friends. Marcy and I sang on a bunch of her albums. There were some wonderful songwriters. There were people who came up from the U.S. to perform. That's where I first heard Malvina Reynolds and the idea that you could literally write a song every single day. And those songs all had such incredible meaning. And then at the same time, I have this big Canadian musical family. I heard a group called the Original Sloth Band with Ken Whiteley, Chris Whiteley, and there was a third member, Tom, and I'm forgetting his last name, but they did vintage early jazz. And I fell in love with that. I fell in love with the music of a Black singer from Hamilton, Ontario named Jackie Washington, not to be confused with the American Jackie Washington. But Jackie knew over 1,000 vintage jazz songs. He played guitar, he played piano. We became friends. Jackie and Ken Whiteley did a lot of work together, and Ken would bring us into that from time to time. I'm just going to say that it was really, really rich. And, at the age of 19 and 20, it's like all you're doing is you're being a sponge and you're turning it around.
Yeah. I mean, I knew you had a connection in Canada, and I was in my mind making a list of all the amazing Canadian musicians who became American stars in music. And my list is just, I mean, it's amazing. Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Gordon Lightfoot, Leonard Cohen, Alanis Morissette, Drake, the band. It goes on and on and on. It's amazing for a country that's not that populous. That it seems like almost half the American stars were born in Canada. It's crazy. I don't know what it is about Canada.
I'll tell you, one of the things is that at the time, and I think it's somewhat different now, but at the time, number one, there was a very big push to recognize Canadian talent, right? Canada felt like, hey, they'd been not recognizing their own talent as much as a lot of people from the United States, and they wanted to change that. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation put together some stuff about playing Canadian content and what that meant. Now, it was a loose definition of Canadian content because my former partner, Doc Donald, and I played, 300 bluegrass old-time duets, and they'd call it Canadian content because we played that stuff on Canadian soil. But the other thing is that CBC is national, and now they, like many other places, have abandoned quite as much of their commitment to the arts. But at the time, they were very committed, and if you got played on CBC radio, you were heard all over the country. So, for instance, in about 74 or 5, my partner and I were part of what they called a transcription record for the CBC. They put 4 acts on one LP, and they brought us into a fancy studio at CBC. It's the first time I'd been in a fancy recording studio, and we recorded 4 or 5 songs. Those songs got played all over the country. And we had the equivalent of a hit song from that. And that meant that when we went and played little towns in Canada, and don't forget that 9/10 of Canada is little towns, people knew who the hell we were. People came. And that support was incredible. we would get calls from really, really nice performing arts centers saying, we just heard you on CBC. Will you come to Vancouver? Will you come here? Will you come there? It was very, very different. And I don't feel that's ever really been the case in the US. To a certain extent, NPR has covered some of that, but Canada is it is a huge country in terms of how much space it takes up. It's a very small country in a lot of other ways. So reaching all Canadians at that moment wasn't that hard. And I think some of those stars that you're talking about who eventually moved to the United States had a leg up from their opportunities in Canada before they crossed the border.
Yeah. So being on CBC really made you a legitimate performer throughout the country. Which I don't think that existed here. I agree with you. I don't think there's anything like that here.
No, it didn't exist here. But I don't know about the word legitimate because I always felt like I was a legitimate performer, but it made it, it translated to people who had otherwise never heard of us.
That's a better answer. Yeah. I recently interviewed Alice Gerrard in this podcast. Now, I was amazed that she was still performing, writing. She's like sharper than I am, that's for sure. She was remembering some parties I think this was in the 60s in Baltimore at Hazel Dickens' house, where anybody from Bill Monroe to the Stanley Brothers to Olivelle Reed would show up, and they would just bring food and sit around on chairs and benches and play music all night. Was that something you were part of? Was that kind of before your
Well, Alice
music
is a
time?
very good friend. I'm 71 and she's 90.
Yeah.
So I wasn't part of that scene.
Mm-hmm.
However, in 1974, and Alice and I, in fact, Marcy and I performed at Alice's 90th birthday concert in Raleigh, and I wrote a song for her called My Last Cup of Coffee. And it's based on, I might even have it here. It's based on the line, something she says on the back of her album, her brand new album, which I highly recommend, Sun to Sun, full of great songs. And she goes, in the dark of the night, I think sometimes about how this might be my final recording, my final mattress, my final car, my final dog. But then you never know. And I took that concept and walked around with it for a long time, and I wrote a waltz because Alice's, amongst other things, really helped hang on to some wonderful fiddle traditions and hung out in the old-time music scene. So I wrote a waltz called My Last Cup of Coffee, and it's got lyrics, and we've been performing it everywhere, and people are loving it. It'll be on the next album. So to answer your question, no, I was too young to be part of that scene. But in 1975, my Canadian partner, Duck Donald, and I were driving to Toronto from Winnipeg. It's a 24 to 28 hour drive on one highway. You go out the door, you turn left, and you just don't stop. And on that drive, we started talking about how we wanted CBC radio to know about our favorite musicians. We wanted there was a show called Touch the Earth that was produced by Paul Mills, and the host was Sylvia Tyson of Ian and Sylvia, although Ian and Sylvia had at that point split up. And we listened to Touch the Earth and we said, well, let's talk them into playing some of our favorite stuff. Maybe we can do an interview or a series of interviews and do a series of 3 shows on the New Lost City Ramblers, Hazel and Alice, and the Strange Creek Singers. So the New Lost City Ramblers was Mike Seeger and Tracy Schwartz, and at one point John Cohen, and at one point Tom Paley. And then Hazel and Alice was Hazel Dickens and Alice Gerrard. And the Strange Creek Singers was Hazel, Alice, Mike, Tracy, and Lamar Greer, a bluegrass banjo player. And, there wasn't anything they had put out that we hadn't listened to 10,000 times and memorized. So we march into CBC radio after our 28-hour drive, knock on the door of Paul Mills, the producer's office, and just like young upstarts, said, we're really excited about this and we want to do these 3 shows for Touch the Earth. And surprise, surprise, Paul Mills looked at us and said, okay, if you can use a your reel-to-reel tape machine and a Neumann U87 microphone and get these interviews and edit them, we'll consider it. So I wrote a letter. At that point, we were in Montreal. We were driving across the country. I wrote a letter to Alice Gerard, and I said, hey, we're on our way to Baltimore, and we'll be hanging out, for a couple of weeks, doing some gigs on the East Coast and staying with my mother. And this is my dream project. Can you help me? And Alice immediately answered. She got hold of everybody. They all said yes. We started at Mike Seeger and Alice Gerard's house. This is when they were married, and Hazel Dickens was there. And Mike had the Your tape machine. He had the U87 microphone. He set it up for us. We did interviews with all of them. We had so much fun. And then Hazel lived in Washington, D.C. Mike and Alice were in New Freedom, Pennsylvania. Hazel didn't drive. She didn't even know how she was going to get home that day. And we just said, oh, we'll drive you home. It was like an hour and a half to my mom's at Baltimore and another hour to where Hazel lived in Washington. And we just thought, well, that's just a chance to spend more time with Hazel Dickens. So we did that and drove back to my mom's. And then we interviewed Tracy in the bathroom of some square dance he was playing at. And we interviewed John Cohen at his house in upstate New York. And Lamar Greer lived in the Washington area. We came over and did that. And we took it back. And a friend of ours was adept at editing tape in the days when it took a razor blade and you made little notes about what words were everywhere. I mean, there were 500 pieces of tape marked all over the place and you tape them back together, but it happened. And they put it on the radio. In fact, about 5 years ago, I emailed Paul Mills, and he no longer worked for CBC. I said, can I get hold of that stuff? And he got me to the right person. I have copies of it. And when I listen to it, when I listen to each of the 3, first of all, I'm like, I couldn't do better now. And second of all, they're just full of great stuff. And all of these people became our friends. They became our mentors. Mike Seeger started an old-time banjo festival with me that ran for 12 years. He was part of a recording session that we did called the Old-Time Banjo Festival. He brought his cello banjo, his 4-string Gibson 1917 cello banjo, which Marcy fell in love with, and that sort of took her in a new musical direction of playing the cello banjo, which is a centerpiece of the music we do as a duo and the music we do with Chow Tien in From China to Appalachia. We still do projects with Alice, and I will say that when Hazel was still alive, and Mike, this is about 15 years ago, Mike had just done a gig with us, but he was going downhill from lymphoma. And he was in his final, week or two at home, and we got a call from his wife who said, Mike would like to see Hazel again. Could you bring her down? And we did. We picked up Hazel. We did the 4-hour drive down to Lexington, Virginia. She got an incredible 2-hour visit with Mike, and we drove her all the way back, talking memories the whole time. And there was a lot of magic there.
Hearing this, it makes me think that there's so much history that people like you and Alice know, stories, memories, and how's it all going to get preserved?
Well, I know that Alice is doing a book of photos I don't know what stage it's at, but I think it's going to be released next year, and it's probably hundreds of photos from her career. In my case, that remains to be seen. It's certainly on my mind. And in fact, at Folk Alliance last weekend, I was interviewed in the session called Wisdom of the Elders. Don't blink. In 1974, I played my first folk festival. I turned 21 at the very first Winnipeg Folk Festival. And here we are in 2025. And oh my God, 51 years has gone by. And so you're right. There are a lot of stories, and some are worth telling, and some I'm just going to protect the guilty and not tell those stories. But it's on my mind. I think sometimes when I do things like this, I'm like, oh, I should write that story down. I'll just tell you, send me the audio tape so AI can transcribe it for me, because it's I think that the history is really important. And at Folk Alliance, I heard so much great music, but I hear a lot of really good music made by people who don't always understand that somebody did this before they did. The songwriters who are inventing songwriting for the very first time, or, whatever it is. And I love being able to say, hey, go listen to this. You might like it. This is where it really came from. And influence people to give, to sort of contextualize that history with what they're artistically doing now.
I guess one of the things that is good about the internet and modern technology is that you don't have to write all this stuff down. It's all these interviews and concerts and things are available, a lot of them on YouTube or by Googling. So a lot of this information is out there. You can hear people talking to you and Alice Gerrard and Hazel Dickens. You can watch it. Whereas before you had to write it down in a book, which is a nice way to do it too, but you lose a lot of the personal thing. When you see somebody talking and interviewed, it's a very more intimate thing, I think, than just writing down a story, to me.
You lose some nuance.
Yeah.
And art is about nuance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good point. Can I mention a few people and just get your reaction to the name I mentioned? The first one would be Marcy Marxer. I know you're partners. You've been together for a long time. Would you care to just describe her?
Sure. Marcy is, she's an incredible musician on a lot of instruments. She's very, very versatile. Guitar, mandolin, ukulele, cello, banjo. She's an incredible percussionist. I mean, 25 years ago, Latin Percussion signed her as a endorser, and we went up to New Jersey and they filled our van with percussion instruments and shipped the rest that they wanted her to play. She is, Marcy's kind of, she's quirky fun. We had a project in 1992. It was mostly her project of producing 100 songs from McGraw-Hill School Publishing. And she kept trying to hire the steel drum band, and they just kind of never showed up. And then she said, well, I know how much I was going to pay them. I bet I can get a set of double tenors for that much. So she orders herself a set of double tenor steel drums, and I leave town for the weekend for a sing-out board meeting. And when I come back, she's got her part down, and she's going to go in the studio on Monday and record the steel drum part. That's, Marcy's like that, and she's phenomenal on world music, flutes and whistles. She is a really good songwriter. She's not a prolific songwriter. She doesn't write a lot of songs, but the ones that she does are so smart and clever and amazing. And she's an amazing teacher. I am the luckiest person in the world. I get to make music with, tour, perform, and just hang out with the love of my life and a brilliant musician. I mean, this is
What's better than that? What's better than that?
We met actually in Canada, July of 1980 at the Toronto Folk Festival. It's a festival that was put on to take the place of Mariposa one year when Mariposa decided, we're not gonna have a festival this year. And the festival was poorly run, poorly organized, went bankrupt before the last song was sung. And there is a pretty good joke about the fact that the one good thing to come of the Toronto Folk Festival is Cathy Fink meeting Marcy Marxer. And we actually have a whole story about that on YouTube. You talk about YouTube having history. There is a YouTube 1 hour storytelling musical thing that we have called Remembering Elizabeth Cotton, When Cathy Met Marcy. And it is hilarious because Elizabeth Cotton is part of that story, and she pops up in our trajectory through the years as well. And we had a blast creating that. I guess I would almost call it a musical theater piece or a musical storytelling piece. So it's been over 44 years.
Yeah. Another name that I know is connected with you is a totally different young person, Liam Purcell.
Oh, Liam,
the Bluegrass
just saw him
guy.
last week. Yeah, so Liam.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that when you were here that you knew him and played with him, and he had just played here recently, and I thought that was an interesting connection.
Yeah, so Marcy and I have a second home in Lansing, North Carolina, which is the original home of Ola Belle Reed, who we were very close to, the woman who wrote the song High on the Mountain. She wrote Tear Down the Fences, I've Endured. And we became very dear friends with Ola Belle's family and did some shows with Ola Belle. And, through a number of different things, made a lot of connections in community in Lansing. And we went one year, it only happened one year. There was a big banjo festival outside of Hickory, North Carolina. I can't even remember where it was. And I was a judge in the banjo contest. Liam was one of the entrants. And Marcy and I had a workshop, and Liam, it was a poorly attended event, the whole thing, hardly any audience. But Liam was the one person who showed up at this workshop. He was a short, chubby kid who at the age of 10 or 11 already played 6 instruments pretty darn well. And we made friends with Liam and his dad and eventually his mom and his younger brother, Kenyon. And in fact, the following summer, we were part of an event that happened at the Old Orchard Creek Blueberry Farm in Lansing. And Liam was part of a youth string band that performed at that event. And his whole family was there. And it was his brother Kenyon's birthday. We have this great song by Red Grammer called On the Day You Were Born. And we sang it to his brother Kenyon. They videotaped it. Kenyon watched that video 1,000 or more times in the following 2 weeks. And we've all become family. And so we host some workshops and sessions at our place in North Carolina. Liam would come to those. Sometimes his dad would bring the whole band. We would have jam sessions, and all the band members and their parents would come, put on a potluck and have a jam session. And also, Marcy and I were able to get him started in the world of good sounding audio recording. We gave him, when we upgraded some of our gear, we gave him our previous gear, and it didn't last forever, but it gave him a start, and he'd come over and mix some stuff at our place, record some stuff at our place. And, I'm also going to say Liam is an insane musical genius on everything he plays. I just heard him playing mandolin at Folk Alliance, and I'm like, how do you keep on getting better? How do you do it? Of course, he puts his time in, and he's got a ton of talent. But the other thing I love about Liam is he's a good human. He's a really, really good human. And I just love him to pieces.
See why. And I agree with you. He's one of the most talented people I've ever heard at his young age. Is unbelievable. So I'm looking at more. You mentioned Ola Belle Reed, who I think a lot of people in bluegrass kind of heard about her through Tim O'Brien and doing her songs, the ones you mentioned, High on a Mountain, I've Endured. So you obviously were friends. In fact, I think I saw a video in black and white of you playing fiddle at one of her concerts. Is that sitting on stage?
That's something I put up on YouTube this year. In that whole concept of legacy that you and I were talking about, mm-hmm. Marcy and I have donated our archives to UNC Chapel Hill Southern Folk Life Archives. That's where Alice's archives are, Cy Kahns, John McCutcheon, a lot of people that we know that we want to be sitting next to. And I think we're the last era to really have archives that fit in boxes, papers,
Yeah.
reviews, articles, magazines, 45 years of festival programs. We also had, I think they took about 100 2-inch reels of tape. And what I haven't handed over to them yet are probably about 400 videotapes that I have had digitized, but
Oh.
haven't had time to go through and annotate. And one of those was a broadcast quality tape of something in, I don't remember the year, I'm going to make believe 84. It was at the Smithsonian Hall of Musical Instruments. It was Ola Belle Reed, her husband Bud, Alice Gerard, and myself. So Alice asked me to back her up on fiddle, and apparently I said yes. You don't see me playing fiddle in public anymore. I play what I call social fiddle, but I was a decent fiddler and getting better at that time. And I think there's a second one of those that I still need to put up on YouTube, but I only made it public a couple of months ago. There's very little video of Ola Belle. So that was really special. And yeah, Tim was instrumental in getting her songs out there, but don't forget that in 1962 is when Del McCoury was the first person to record High on a Mountain. And I think that was a big changing point in her musical career.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is this bluegrass component to your life. I don't know how to describe your music. How do you describe your music? Just Americana, roots, folk, whatever, just music.
all that stuff.
All that
Marcy and
stuff.
I have cleverly defied the one-word description, so we kind of stick with contemporary and traditional American roots. And
that covers a lot. Yeah.
Obviously with our band with Chow Tien from China to Appalachia, we have branched out into what some people would call global or world music. But the idea of connecting these cultures came so naturally to all of us that it just feels like an extension of what Marcy and I have always done.
Yeah. I kind of feel like labeling music has become more and more of a thing compared to what it was 50 or 80 years ago. And I don't think it's necessarily a positive thing because everybody has a little niche. And then if you cross out of it, I don't know.
Well, in most ways, it's not positive because it does try to put people in little boxes. I think what's the word? I think the evolution of marketing music has caused music marketers to want simple descriptions. And of course, the whole thing of genre-based stuff, when you think about it, those boxes have been there for a long time. They haven't always been quite so obvious, but, when you think back, and now, of course, we have this totally wonderful, overdue recognition of the African-American influences of country, old-time, bluegrass, you name it. And, in the 20s, when recordings were first being made of old-time country music, they were divided into hillbilly music, which basically meant white, and race music, which basically meant black. That was, I think, when recordings came out, that was sort of the beginning of let's find a box so the right people know what they're buying or something like that. And I didn't really say that elegantly, but it was, and it's gotten harder and harder, right? For a while, you could say the word folk music and you might know what you were thinking of. I just got back from the Folk Alliance conference in Montreal, and I cannot define this word. You've got that one definition that a lot of people use. Well, all folks are people, and so all music is folk music. Then you've got people who feel like, it comes from a tradition. Is rock and roll folk music? Well, yes and no. I feel like those are rabbit hole discussions. I think the naming of genres primarily has to do with marketing, for better and for worse.
Okay, I think I agree with you there. The other name so along those lines, I was thinking about Bill Monroe, who Alice Gerrard said was a frequent, visitor or participant in these music camps and parks and parties. And he would show up with his bus and come in, and they would play and sing and drink and talk. Did you deal with him at all in your musical career, Monroe?
I heard Bill play several times, and I heard him play several amazing concerts. I was in one jam session with Bill Monroe after a Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and he absolutely refused to give me a banjo break. The breaks all went to men. I recognize Bill for what he gave to the music, but I also recognize that he didn't necessarily treat women that well, and I ain't going to glorify that. He treated Hazel and Alice well, and I'm glad about that. And he wrote that song, The One I Love Is Gone, for them to sing.
Familiar with that one.
Yeah, but that was I saw two amazing concerts. I've listened to tons and tons of Bill Monroe music, but, he was also a male of the time, so to speak. And what I'm curious about, which of course we'll never know, is if Bill was alive today, would he have advanced with the times?
Good question. I just read his biography, which is not new. Can't You Hear Me Calling? And it was surprising. I mean, I knew he was a womanizer and yada yada, but I guess I was surprised to the extent that he had a girl in every town, I think, and he'd get into town and call him up, and maybe they'd come with him, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. That's what the book says.
Yeah, and he didn't always treat his band really well.
No.
When Lamar Greer worked for Bill Monroe, he had to also work in a grocery store bagging groceries to make sure he took enough money and food home for the family.
Yeah, that's...
Everybody's a mixed bag. And again, it's possible that if Bill was around today and saw other ways of doing things, it's possible that he would have advanced with the times. We got no way of knowing.
Mm-hmm. A little sidetrack here. Is there anything or anyone that really cracks you up these days, that really makes you laugh hysterically? For me, one of the things I really love, there's a comic in the paper called Dustin, and it's about a kind of a slacker 20-year-old guy and his family. And it's just, a typical comic, three pictures. But every day I read it, it just cracks me up. Is there anything that you, like a go-to funny thing or person that always gets you going that way? Because I know you have a sense of humor. I can tell you're smiling all the time. So, yeah.
No, not really. I mean, there are people. I got to spend some time with Connie Calder, a folk singer and songwriter from Canada who I've known for probably 50 years. And Connie is still writing smart, clever, hilarious songs. There she was at Folk Alliance with her family band singing a sea shanty. Now that cracks me up. Peter and Lou Berryman, two of the most brilliant songwriters on the planet, can almost always crack me up. But I will say that in my often work with Tom Paxton, we crack each other up a lot. We've been writing a lot of satirical songs in the last year and more. We write a song together every week. Every Wednesday, we do a Zoom if one or the other of us isn't, otherwise obligated. And needless to say, if you're a political songwriter, you got a lot to write about right now. And the last couple songs that we've written, when we're done, we're just laughing our heads off that we actually did it. And then I put them up on YouTube and Facebook and where. And Tom and I wrote a song 2 weeks ago called "I Bought Me a President." And it only cost $250 million. And it's on on YouTube, it's got 750,000 views and 5,000 comments. Over the summer, we wrote childless cat ladies. And that went hilariously viral and made us laugh so hard. And even when we were out doing shows with Chow Tien, the China to Appalachia shows, which have nothing to do with the songs that Tom and I write together, people in the audience would be yelling, "Are you going to do childless cat ladies?" And, Chow has a good enough sense of humor that she's willing to play along with it. So we also have to kind of make ourselves laugh right now while we're experiencing this insane time. And I do feel that humor is one of the ways that helps us remain activists at the same time as we do the serious work that we need to do. This morning on Facebook, I posted something based on a conversation last night. We went to a classical guitar concert yesterday. It was fantastic. And a friend of mine was there, and she said, "I'm on the board of such and such performing arts center." I'm not going to name them. And she said, the board was just told that they are taking DEI off of the website. And they're not going to change the programming, but they're taking DEI off of the website and blah, blah, blah. Well, my answer to that is a post that I made with a giant, explosive, colorful background that says artists and performing arts centers need to say no to McCarthy-like DEI erasure requirements. Artists will stand behind you, donors will pony up, and the truth will be sung, danced, spoken, and acted. And so, in light of that, a couple years ago when Ron DeSantis was going into his, don't say gay shit, excuse my language, Tom and I wrote a comedy song called Don't Say Gay. And we've made a hilarious video, including we went down to rehearsal of the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington and recorded the song with them. They sang on the chorus, and Tom's sitting next to a couple of queens with their high heels on, and Marcy's popping in and out of the audience from everywhere. And, at that moment, we're making a really important statement and helping people understand it and laughing at the same time. This is the same Gay Men's Chorus that was just nixed from performing at the Kennedy Center during World Pride Week. And then they lied. The Kennedy Center has taken on the Trump lying method and said, "Oh, we had already nixed that before this new administration in the Kennedy Center." There's no truth to that whatsoever. We got to speak out more than ever. And it doesn't matter what kind of music we play or what kind of art we do. We were at dinner a couple weeks ago with a friend of ours who happens to be our trademark attorney, and I'm posting all these songs that Tom and I are writing, and I go, "Deborah, when they haul me into jail, are you going to bail me out?" She said, "Absolutely, because I'm not going to shut up."
No, there's definitely a lack of backbone in our culture right now among most political figures.
There's fear. And
whatever.
That fear, I think, challenges backbone.
Mm-hmm.
But all you have to do is go back to the 1930s and the 1950s, and in our lives, I wasn't aware as a child of what Pete Seeger went through with the House Un-American Committee, but I certainly became aware of it as I became aware of Pete, eventually became friends with Pete, did some work with Pete. This is wrong. And people have to speak up at every turn. And I really worry. I worry a lot, but I'm not going to back down, and we need the entire system to not back down.
Was there ever a point in your life where you felt discouraged, maybe more than now, to the point that you thought about just giving up music or doing something else? Or were you ever, never happened?
There's a million challenges to the music business and the music industry. Um, Luckily, going back to sort of the opening of our conversation, luckily, Marcy and I have nurtured a very versatile career. About 50% of it is not even in the public view. I, for 20 years, have worked at a local performing arts center, the Music Center at Strathmore, where I'm a musical advisor and mentor in their artist in residence program. That's behind the scenes, but it's a big part of what I do. Marcy and I both work with the Baltimore Classical Guitar Society in their execution of the Carnegie Hall Lullaby Project. And in the last 3 years, we've written about 200 songs with immigrant and teenage mothers, with veterans, with elderly people. And then we meet these people, we hear their stories, we figure out what songs they want to write for their own children or their own families. We write those songs with them. We come home, we record the songs, they get those songs along with a book. We get to celebrate with them. You know, last year we did 100 songs. That's 10 albums. This is behind the scenes work. Luckily, our behind the scenes work has helped us make a really good living. And then we, you know, in our mentoring work with people like Liam, Trey Wellington, the stuff we do at Strathmore, you know, we try very hard to turn it around. We're both mentoring 2 or 3 artists at a time in a volunteer scenario, you know. Yeah. So the music business itself can often be discouraging. There are so many stupid things to the music business. Does it make me not want to play music? Not at all. Does it make me not want to write songs? Not at all. Sometimes it makes me not want to be part of the music business and just do these other things that I do that are very nurturing to me and to other people. But I'm pretty resilient. And as I tell all the people that I mentor, if you're going to get upset every time somebody says no, then you've got to go find a different job. In the archives that we turned over to UNC Chapel Hill, I have so many rejection letters. And one hilarious folder has all the rejection letters I got from different record labels through the years, and then a lot of my contracts that I had with the same record labels through the years, and then a lot of the contracts where I took those records back and self-released them again through the years. I mean, you have to do this because you love it and because you want to do it. If you do it for the purpose of thinking you're going to be famous or rich, it's kind of the wrong reason, and you may become rich and famous. And you may even be incredibly lucky, but that's none of those things are what my career is based on.
So looking back at your career, if I could ask you this, is there any one person that you would have liked to have been able to perform with that never got the chance to?
Oh, that one's easy.
Oh.
Mother Maybelle Carter.
Okay.
You know, I never got to meet her. I have studied her guitar playing like crazy and did a whole course on it for Peghead Nation, with the Carter scratch and the way that she constructed her guitar breaks. And she was generous, talented, fun, sometimes very funny. And really the first person to shine in a solo guitar kind of way. And in all the work that I've done on the history of women in old time music and in country music, which includes touring and performing with Patsy Montana, first woman in country music to sell 1 million records. I was a co-curator and participant in creating the Birthplace of Country Music Museum's exhibit. I've endured women in old time music. We just celebrated a festival that I co-curated called Say Sister in Baltimore to go along with that exhibit. Mother Maybelle passed away a few years before I became aware of that music. And, you know, if I had a time machine, musically, she'd be the first person I want to meet.
Yeah. One of the early shows we did back in 2008 was Carlene Carter. She played at a local venue, that one of our shows, with a keyboard player and a guitar player and her, and she was doing a lot of the old Carter family stuff. It was, in a way, I didn't grow up with that music at all. The first time I heard of me about Carter was on the Will the Circle Be Unbroken album. So that was what, 72. I'm the same
Right.
age you are, so I that was the first time I'd ever heard that kind of music really in my life. But yeah, I think that's a good answer. I like that.
We
Mabel
wore
Carter.
that album out.
Yeah.
There was a lot, there were names there that we were familiar with,
Mhm.
but there were more names that we got to know through that
Right.
album. And um, that album served a huge purpose in recognizing a whole group of people that are not around now.
Right. Right. I know you do a lot of teaching, a lot of workshops. Do you prefer working with kids or adults?
Um, we don't do a huge amount of teaching with kids. We've done a lot
Don't.
of performing
Gotcha.
uh, for kids and families. And for many years, we performed in, thousands of schools. We occasionally perform in a school now, um, but we still love doing family concerts and sing-alongs. We've had an annual event at the Kennedy Center, which has been an all ages, all instruments welcome sing-along, strum-along. And we're, of course, now looking for a different venue to keep that fun going,
Right.
because it's been really, really fun. And one of the things that we have at events like that is we have like 2, 3 generations of families who've been with us, bringing their next generation and enjoying the whole thing. And so we're absolutely looking for what's our replacement venue going to be, unless things change at the Kennedy Center, because um, we've got to play places where everybody's welcome.
It's funny because I lead bluegrass jams here. I have for quite a long time, and people love sing-along songs. In bluegrass jams, I have to say, look, you can do one or two. We're not going to do 22 sing-alongs because that's just sing-along songs. It's not a bluegrass thing. But they love Will the Circle Be Unbroken? I'll Fly Away. Everybody sings. There'll be 18 people. They're all singing along, and the whole audience is singing. So I think there's this innate need in people, that kind of sing-along community music spirit that they don't get anymore. And so that's why they're so happy to do it. And I have to say, look, come on, we can do a few, but we've got to do some Bill Monroe and some Stanley Brothers, and then we can do a sing-along. So it's just funny. I find it funny that everybody just can't wait to do that.
Well, I also think that post COVID and post the first Trump administration, people felt, during COVID, people felt this enormous need to be together and do something meaningful together. And singing is something that we do together. You don't have to be great at it. You just have to want to do it. And it unites us. It builds community. And people felt this giant need for community. And in a bluegrass jam session, I know exactly what you're talking about, but songs like you just mentioned are songs where not only can everybody sing, but you can still take turns with instrumental solos and all that. It's sort of like there's something for everybody in there.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is a kind of a philosophical, maybe last question, but looking back on your life and career, would you have done anything differently had you known what you know now, or you just happy with the path that evolved?
I'm happy with the path that evolved, but what I will say is that if I knew what I know now and I was 19, I would get a degree as a music therapist and then do my performing on the weekends. I'm very, very dedicated to music, healing, music, and medicine. I'm actually currently, in addition to everything else I do, a student at Columbia University getting a certificate in the field of narrative medicine, which is a rabbit hole I fell into after Marcy's cancer diagnosis, my cancer diagnosis, and my learning curve on how to market the musical theatrical comedy film that we made called All Wigged Out, about Marcy's experience with cancer and cancer treatment. And it dropped me into this hole of narrative medicine, which is a place where the arts and humanities and better medical outcomes overlap and help each other. And I think that, of course, nobody gets to know what they know now and go back 50 years. If I could, that's one more thing that I'd want to be really, really, really focused on.
Yeah. Interesting. So if you had a week off, if you both had a week off, no gigs, no recordings, no obligations, where would you head?
We're doing that for the first time in about 6 years, and we're heading to a week-long cycling trip in Hokkaido, Japan.
Whoa. That sounds amazingly cool. There's some public TV channel that I occasionally get, which is some guy biking, some American guy, I guess, who speaks Japanese, biking through Japan and stopping in these little towns and talking to artisans and, homeowners and people, fishermen. Unbelievable, fascinating. That sounds amazing.
Well, we've done 4 concert tours in Japan through the years, but it's been 20 years since we were there. And we have 2 Japanese families we've become very close with through the years. I mean, we met them when they each had 1 baby, and now they have each got grown kids and grandkids and the whole deal. So we're going to cycle Hokkaido and then make our way to Kanazawa, visit our friends, and then get back in time to work with Chow and take from China to Appalachia to the Old Songs Festival.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That sounds like an amazing trip, and I know you deserve a little break from. You're a very, very busy person, obviously, and very dedicated and hardworking and determined and motivated. So I guess it's nice to be able to take a little time and just enjoy.
It's kind of a combination of nice, and right now I feel like it's necessary to create some distance and look at what we're doing from afar, or actually not think about it for a week from afar. And every time we go to foreign countries, and particularly foreign countries that aren't Western countries, like even Europe, we performed at a Uke Fest in Italy last year. It was really fun. But when we go to countries that have a very, very different worldview, it gives us the opportunity to do a personal chiropractic readjustment. And we haven't given ourselves that opportunity in over 5 years, and I'm ready.
I think people need that. You're so caught up in all the negative stuff going on every second of every day, and it does it brings people down. And I think it's often hard to get away from it. But I think one way to do it is to get to another place where priorities are very different. They're not thinking about Donald Trump every second.
We'll just, it's a challenge. We did 2 bike tours in New Zealand 30 years ago with a bunch of friends and somehow managed to mix them all up with concert dates. And it was hilarious and fun. Well, it's 30 years later. I'm not going to say this is going to be easy. We have to train for it. And Marcy and I are going to bow down to the gift of e-bikes on the road.
Smart. Yeah.
But the idea of going with friends who aren't in the music business and just have fun and see something different and beautiful and get out of our day-to-day is really valuable.
Yeah, good for you. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. The hour flew by, and you have a lot of interesting and fun stories and experiences, and I appreciate you talking to me. It was fun. Thank you.
Great questions, Chris, and thanks for including me.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right here. Thanks. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.